Please let's collect a few more. Mic on the back and here. 2 more, please. And then we will final round.
我来自绿色金融研究所，我姓王，王小江。
1 second, please.
那我个人我来自绿色金融研究所。那么，我个人认为呢，把金融行为和可持续发展结合的最关键的有几个问题。第一个问题就是关于这个标准的问题。那么，如果因为环境问题首先是个标准的问题，如果我们没有完整的建立一个系统的技术标准体系，究竟什么样算是绿色，或者是什么算是可持续发展，没有建立一套完整的技术体系的话，那么我们站在这块说话的时候，那么这里可能产生各种各样的障碍，比方说投资的障碍，是吧？投资保护的投资保护的障碍就会种种出现。所以说，我觉得关键是要建立一个技术标准体系。那么这第一个问题。第二个问题呢，就是要关于信息的问题。那信息，这个谁来发布信息？那么第一个，我觉得当然企业自身的发布很重要，但是企业出于自利的目的，这种信息的发布是我个人觉得是采用的可信度是有限的。另外，当然要就是政府的监管信息。那比方说在中国，现在我们做的就是我们研究所现在做的就是，把企业的很多的基础信息，比方说政府的信息、触发的信息，我们都把它汇总起来，做了一个数据库，为各个投资者、为我们监管机构提供一个参考。我觉得这个信息就是通过我们自发的建立这么一个庞大的信息数据库，为各种投资者提供一个参考的依据，我觉得非常重要，因为它可以站在比较中立的角度来考虑问题。这个数据库呢，我觉得应该希望得到各方面的支持。第三个就是关于这个可持续行为的管理的问题。这个管理，我个人觉得，首先是在政府在这里要承担什么，把这个责任应该明确。企业就是说，我们的金融机构承担什么，也应该明确。比方说，我们的监管机构、金融监管机构到底要承担一个什么样的责任？我们的证监所要承担一个什么样的责任？我们的上市公司承担责任？这个要把责任都明确划分出来。这样的话，大家伙才能够站在一个公平的舞台，才能有利于管理。第三个当然就是社会的这种组织参与，因为可持续发展行为是我们社会的行为，就是把社会的组织参与进来，投入到整个管理体系当中去。这也是我们在应该说在我所在地呢，正在这个社会的实践，在实践当中也发挥了巨大的作用，保证我们公布的所有的信息和对企业的监督的制约，达到我们一个管理的效率的目的。这是我提到一个关于金融行为和可持续发展行为怎么样有效的结合，我提出3点的建议。谢谢。
Thank you very much. I think these were extremely important points, and they echo some of the debates we had. On your issue of the role of governments, we will have the next session, which addresses more specifically the question of voluntary versus compatible, complementary to regulatory. All the other questions, I think, are relevant to all of us here. I think this concludes the question part, and we have some very specific questions before us, and I invite now the panelists, maybe from my right to my left, to give a final response to the questions raised, and maybe a final thought on your takeaway from the session as a whole. But I would urge you to be very brief. The time is officially over. I love to stick to time. I hate to not meet the time, so try to do it all in 1 minute. And I will check on my watch here.
I think that I will again emphasize the importance of education and the importance of investor awareness. Do really investors care? Do they know enough whether they should care or not? Is the main purpose behind investment the highest return, or sustainability and these ESG issues, do they really matter so much that they take the priority to highest return. I think that is the major question that the investors will have to deal with before we as exchanges or the regulators start really caring about it. And I think that is the most important.
Thank you. Very pointed. Jane?
Thank you. I think Donald MacDonald might have liberated the elephant in the room, actually. And that is that long-termism has a revenue effect. And I think that it's sort of like a secret that nobody wants to actually talk about. And that is that you actually make less money if you don't churn your stock. Let's think about it. And the drivers of behaviour of some people are just to trade. And that is how they make their money. And some stock exchanges, as Sanders said, make their money that way. So I think we have to actually recognise this reality and deal with it if we're going to deal with this large problem, and not to sweep it under the carpet and talk really about higher thoughts when this is largely about money. Anyway, that's one point. Vulgar, but nevertheless true. And the second point I'd like to make is I do take the point about the moral and ethical issues here. And my own feeling is that we are desperate to get some traction with people who have seemed unmoved by the moral and ethical arguments. So I don't think that any of us are rejecting those moral and ethical arguments. We're merely looking for a variety of arguments that will gain traction where perhaps those other arguments have failed to gain traction. They're very important. We should keep them front of mind. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jane.
On Donald MacDonald's question, it's a question of the revenue authorities applying their minds, Donald, and changing the formula. Instead of the number of trades, perhaps taxing value. And this discussion has been held numerous times with exchanges, but I think it's a question of application of mind by the tax authorities, more so than a problem for the stock exchanges. But secondly, on the question of ethics and social issues, in 1992 I wrote a paper in which I said I can think of nothing more ethical or more positive for society than an entrepreneur in a disadvantaged area in which people are unemployed, creating a business and having a business idea, and starting the business, creating employment, improving the quality of lives of people, enabling men and women in that area to have certain innate qualities, didn't even realize they had these qualities, to express them and grow. Now I can think of nothing more social and ethical, and I call that social profit. And when you look at companies today, they're no longer this juristic entity in which entrepreneurs have just placed their business and ring-fenced their risks. Companies have become integral to society. As you expect me as your neighbour to act socially responsibly and ethically, so we expect in the community today companies to act as responsible corporate citizens. So I think social and ethical issues are critical to good governance. Can't divorce them.
Yeah, I think following on that social and ethical side, looking at it from an investment viewpoint, I think the decision on the ethical dimension has to lie with the ultimate owner of the capital. If it's a private citizen or a private company, of course, they can do whatever they like, and it's at their whim if they want to introduce that ethical element. It gets a little more complicated with institutions. Of course, some pension funds feel obliged not to, feel they have to maximise returns, although I think the laws in different countries are getting more learned in that regard. So I think in some cases there is a regulatory element that could usefully be clarified so that people feel empowered to take those things into account rather than simply maximising return. And I think for asset management firms, you have to be guided by what the clients are asking you to do. Although I would say we had a very interesting conversation with some of our senior investors about a year ago, where having a real heart-to-heart with them, we discovered that a lot of them privately are providing moral and ethical overlays to what they do, even though it's not really what anyone's ever asked them to do. As human beings, they do build in those sorts of judgments anyway, which I personally found rather encouraging. Just needs to be a bit more structured and codified going forward. And then to the point the gentleman was making with regard to research, I think when you're carrying out ESG research, there's definitely a scope to use third parties as well as your own internal people to do that, because you have a different perspective, and to some degree specialists in this area can generate analysis across companies, which can be a useful addition to what you're doing in-house yourself.
Thank you, Paul. Caroline, your last words?
Thank you. Actually, I'm really discouraged by what I'm going to say. I wish I had said it at the outset. Because, of course, the OECD does a lot of codes, and we believe in ethics and all of this. But on the other hand, we're also an economic organization. So when you're talking also about getting traction, and I have to say 2 words and explain them. I have to say something about externalities. I mean, why do people keep doing bad things? Well, it's because they don't pay. They're not responsible. So one thing one can do is make sure that companies and people who create bad things have some kind of liability for them. Another thing, if you think something, another way to get traction is to put a price on it. I mean, companies will respond to price, and they will react. They will reduce carbon consumption, for example, if it has a price. And talking with some of you, companies are prepared to do a lot of carbon reduction and invest a lot of money if, in fact, they know it's going to have a price. So it's kind of discouraging to end with something kind of purely economic, but there are reasons why companies keep doing the things that we wish they wouldn't do. And in the financial area, systemic risk, trying to make companies responsible for the products they sell, putting a price on, trying to put some kind of a price on creation of systemic risk, and the same thing is true in the environmental area. So, sorry to be so mundane, but there are practical aspects to this too.
Caroline, I think you hit the nail right, because James Gifford, the CEO of PRI, knows very well that the whole foundation of the business proposition is precisely based on that. So I think with this final comments all around here, I think we had a good opening session, and I want to ask you, thank please the panelists for, and thank you all. I think the day just started. I hope we warmed up our spirits. We really want to build on this and carry it forward. This was just the warm-up session. Thank you very much.
This initiative, and what we're looking at in session 2, with an absolutely stellar panel who are full of vim and vigor, right, is really the basket of issues around the tension between voluntary or regulatory approaches in the context of what exchanges can do to promote and advocate ESG issues. House rules, our panel, who I'll introduce in a minute, are going to speak briefly, but I want to roll it into the audience as quickly as possible. I think the session before lunch was a great conversation. We had a lot of interactivity, and I could feel energy from the audience in terms of questions. So I want to jump back into that spirit. Let me, first of all, introduce our panel. And we have, I'm delighted to say, on my immediate left, we have Mr. Yang Geng, who is the chairman of the Shanghai Stock Exchange. Obviously delighted to have him here, so thank you for joining us. On Mr. Geng's left, we have Mr. Michel Mackie, who's the president and CEO of the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's with us again for the 2nd year running, so you must like it. You've come back. Okay, that's excellent. On my immediate right, we have Rani Rasaya, from who is the Chief Regulatory Officer for Bursa Malaysia. Welcome, glad to have you on board. And then a figure many of the community in the responsible investment mafia worldwide. Many of you know him. It's Donald MacDonald, who's Scottish, would you believe? And Donald is both the chairman of the PRI, the Principles for Responsible Investment, and he's a director of trustee board at BT Pension Scheme. So we have tremendous experience in terms of both exchanges and from the investor and the investor side.